So for this example, we're going to put together everything that we have discussed for amplitude, period, and a vertical shift. And so you can see that our A value right here, this is going to be our amplitude, and that's going to help us with our stretch of our graph. We also have our B value, and this B value right here is going to be changing the period. And then you have your vertical shift, which is based off of your D value, and that's going to have a main effect on your midline. Now all of these will also have effects on the domain and range, but these are the three primary areas that we're going to want to focus on. All right, so remember that we're dealing with the sine function, and when you're dealing with the sine function, again, your output values are 0, 1, 0, -1, and 0. All right, and the only thing that happens to the y values when you're dealing with the sine function is the amplitude and the vertical shift. All right, those are the two different operations that happen to the output. So based off of what we have here, I'm going to need to multiply times 3 and subtract 1. Right? And so that's what I'm going to do first. So anything that happens to a change in the amplitude, change in the vertical shift, those are all going to happen to this side, or these output values here. And you don't need to color code yours. I just like to. Right. All right, so 3 times 0 minus 1 is a -1. 3 minus 1 is a 2. Again, -1. So this is going to be -3 minus 1, which is a -4, and then back to -1. And then remember that the B value that I have affects my, my period change. So this affects where I place my x values. And because this is a 6, I need to do the opposite, or the reciprocal of that, which is to multiply everything times 1/6. Right? So I'm going to write that down. Again, this is going to squish my graph inward. Right? And you always need to make sure that you simplify your fractions. Right? For right now, when we label our x-axis, these are the values that I'm going to want to use, and so when I change my new placement, that'll be my new labeling. All right, and so this is going to end up being pi over 12, and then pi over 6. And then we need to think about simplifying down, because this fraction 3 is going to cancel with the 6, and I'm going to end up with a pi over 4, and then a pi over 3. All right, so you have to make sure that you simplify all of your fractions when you're doing the multiplication. And now I can look at my absolute value of 3, which is 3 is my amplitude. All right. My period change is 2 pi divided by b, which is 1/3, or pi over 3. My domain is going to go from 0 to pi over 3. And now my range, my lowest y value is -4, and my highest y value is 2, and then my midline is down here at -1. And so again, this is what you want your chart to look like, your input-output chart, and how you want to identify all of the key pieces. So let's go ahead and make our graph. Again, this is going to be y equals 3 times the sine of 6x minus 1. And so you need to have a lower y-axis. All right, so 1, 2. All right, so labeling my y-axis this way. And then again, I need to be able to make labels along here. And so I'm just going to choose to label every other one. And when I do that, I'm going to actually label it with the labels that I have on my x values. So the new placement is what I'm going to label. All right, so I really don't need to make it look like some of these others where I have the pi over 2s and the 3 pi over 2s. I'm just going to use the same labels I have. All right. I'm going to put my midline on there. Again, that's always good to see because sine should have 3 points rooted on your midline. All right, and so here's my first coordinate. All right, at the pi over 12 marker, I'm going to be up to 2. Okay. Pi over 6, I'm going to be back down on my midline. At pi over 4, I'm down here at -4. And at pi over 3, I'm back to my midline. Again, remember, when you're making these, you want them to look like U-shapes. So one thing you could do is make these little hills and valleys, and then just go and connect your graph upward and then downward. Right. And then that's one way to make your sine function if you struggle with to get a nice hill and a nice valley.